So obviously I'm going to show my age today because I was actually involved in the activity around the Stephen Lawrence campaign 30 years ago. So it's a weird thing because it makes me feel both old and also quite obviously it's kind of interesting to reflect back on what we did. We actually did stuff in Manchester. You'll be pleased to hear. But I'll get on to that in a bit. So, a little bit of background, in case you don't know the story, I'm sure everyone does in this room. Stephen Lawrence was at a bus stop with a mate of his, and they were attacked by 5 racists. 2 of them stabbed Stephen Lawrence to death. And it sparked the biggest campaign, anti-racist campaign I think there's ever been in the UK, about a UK case. I know in many ways Black Lives Matter was probably even bigger in terms of the amount of people it touched in the UK, but in terms of a UK death due to racism, it had the biggest impact that anything's ever had, and was kind of a bit of a watershed. So it's worth reflecting for us today about maybe what happened then, what's changed now, what does it mean for us today? I'll try and cover that if I can in some way or other. We got to know, obviously, a lot about Stephen Lawrence after his death. What he wanted to do as a student, he wanted to be an architect. He was loved by his parents. His parents were obviously deeply disturbed and shocked, as were his family, and they became, both his mother and father became a lifelong campaigner against racism out of circumstance because of what happened to their son. And it opened up to everyone's eyes the racism of the police service, the racism within society that wasn't addressed, the fact that I think there was over 30 people came forward with information within 24 hours of his death to say who the 5 killers were. And yet the police did nothing to arrest them. One person rang in when they saw 2 of the brothers, the Acourt brothers, disposing of stuff in a black bin line and putting it in rubbish, and rang up the police to report it, and the police didn't bother collecting that evidence, weren't interested, didn't do anything. Their primary line of inquiry from the very start was that somehow Stephen must have been a drug dealer. He must have been someone that was in trouble with the police. He must have been a young man. If knives were involved, he must have been the one carrying it. When I went to see Neville Lawrence, the dad, speak the weekend just gone by, and he said he was reminded of the fact that when the police came round to tell them that a son had been murdered, they obviously already knew, but when they came round, they had relatives round who'd come round to express their shock, condolences to what had happened, and the first thing the police wanted to do was take down everyone's details that was in the home, potentially for further questioning, and Neville had to say to them, "What are you taking their names down there? They didn't murder my son. Why are you interrogating them?" So various, that's how it started. Those stories were spread by the police into the media, that somehow that Dwayne Brooks and Stephen Lawrence were somehow were up to no good, and that's why they'd been killed. They continued that line to start with. It came out later that one of the fathers of one of the 5 that murdered Stephen Lawrence, he was actually a police informant, and they didn't want to upset their relationship with the police informant, so they didn't want to question his son. All this came out later, and the corruption around spy cops and all this stuff came out. It also came out that there were 3 undercover police officers that spent most of their time in those years after Stephen's death actually conducting surveillance on the Lawrence family. So it's quite a shocking indictment of how the state reacts when and it wasn't the first black kid to die in Elton. He was the third that died. Roland Adams, Rohit Duggill, they died in previous years. In fact, Stephen Lawrence went to the funeral of one of those people, Roland Adams, only 2 years before he was murdered. He knew that there were a group of racists operating in his area of South London. They've been encouraged and to be and more and more racist and fascist propaganda was around South London and the pubs of South London, because the BNP, the British National Party, were the main fascist party at the time, had opened a bookshop in that area and were distributing material through the pubs. And there was various stories. Those are 3 that got murdered. There was various other stories of people being assaulted and attacked walking the streets of Oldham if you happen to be black or Asian at that time in that part of London. So all this stuff started to come out, and I remember that we organised, as the Anti-Nazi League, kind of like the stand-up to racism of the time, organised a march to shut down the bookshop in Welling. And again, it's informative for us to think back on this. 60,000 people went to that demo. We sent a few coaches from Manchester down to that demo. And at the demo, I never got to the end of it because the people at the front of the demo got bludgeoned by the police. You can see pictures. We had an organiser at the time, Julie Watson, unfortunately she's passed away. She was bloodied. There was a number of people that were just physically beaten by the police to stop us going anywhere near the bookshop with our demonstration to try and get it shut down. And it's also interesting who lined up against us at the time. The TUC, the Labour Party, Labour Party leadership called us as bad as the fascists for mobilising against them, and actually organised a separate protest in the centre of London to tell people not to go to ours, to try and shut down the Welling bookshop. 60,000 came on ours, about 200-300 went on theirs. But anyway, nevertheless, that was the role that they played at the time. And actually, after that, we had a speaking tour across the country. And I remember Devon Lawrence came up and spoke at Ducey High School. I don't think it's still there now. It's called the Manchester Academy, and that old school's been knocked down, but it was packed. It was packed. It was the biggest venue we could get, nearest to Moss Side. We'd had meetings for the Tottenham 3, the Cardiff 3, for Wilson Silcott at the Westwood Centre. We decided the Westwood Centre wasn't big enough to have the amount of people that wanted to come out and hear about Stephen Lawrence and support the campaign. It finally led in 1994 to, we organised a march and carnival in South London, and about 180,000 people turned up to that carnival. The march was too long, I was knackered by the time I got to the carnival, but there was obviously, any band that was involved in kind of had a, there was a whole mixture of bands from different kind of genres of music. Soul and jazz was big at the time, and various other musicians and artists gave their time for free, played for free to make sure that carnival was as big as it was. And we never really looked back after that in terms of building a mass campaign. We built it so big that the Daily Mail actually had a front page that said murderers about the 5, yeah? Daily Mail. So that's pretty good going, isn't it, to get that far, yeah? And it led to, when the Labour government got in 97, it led to them actually the promise they had to make to the parents that they would hold an inquiry into what had happened, what had gone wrong. Why, at that point, were there 5 killers still on the loose, never been arrested for it, still able to walk free while Stephen was dead. And that inquiry then led to the term institutional racism, and that was a huge step forward, because up until that point, if you looked at the last time there was a report into race and policing, was a Scarman report of the Brixton riots in the early 80s. Lord Scarman didn't think the police were institutionally racist or is it systematic in any way. He just thought there was one or two bad apples that like beating up black people and being racist. And he refused to come out and use the term. But they had no, I mean, they did opinion polls. I won't go through it today. I won't go through it because I'm probably talking too much about some of this stuff. But they did opinion polls about would you be okay if there was a black person in your family? If your son or daughter married someone who was black, you know? And there was a huge shift in the figures before and after the Stephen Lawrence campaign. So yeah, it went from like 75% thinking that they wouldn't like it if you had a black person in your family, to 25% being okay with it, to the other way around within the space of a few years. So a huge impact on society as a whole, the whole Stephen Lawrence thing. And that, to my mind, had a bigger impact than any government promises around dealing with institutional racism. To give you an idea, Jack Straw, who's the person that ordered the inquiry, at the same time as they ordered the inquiry, Britain passed its first bit of legislation to develop the term asylum seeker. Okay, so up until then, there was no such thing as asylum seeker. You were a refugee. If you were seeking sanctuary in this country, you were regarded as a refugee. There was no distinction. It was the Labour government at the same time that brought in the idea that somehow there was a different category of people called asylum seeker, who they often attach the word illegal to the beginning of them. Obviously, we can see where that's ended up now with Cruella Braverman, but we know where that, unfortunately, that started under Labour government. And for those that obviously remember the Afghan and Iraq war, Labour also spearheaded Prevent and the whole attack on scapegoating Muslims, because if you want to justify a war that kills millions of people that have got brown skin, the best way of doing it is saying somehow they aren't the same as us, so they're somehow inferior. That somehow they can't be trusted. Even it meant that they couldn't be trusted in this country either. Yeah, and that led to the whole legislation about Prevent from that government at the same time. So although they had to concede the term institutional racism, they had to concede the police were corrupt, for the first time we actually had a police chief, so they were institutionally racist. Obviously, straight after that we started to back away from that. Yeah, your Cressida Dix, whatever the idiot is that's in charge of the Met now, I don't want to say the word, it's political. Well, they don't want to say the word because they don't want to admit that they're institutionally racist. So actually the Tories are the ones that obviously, in response to the Black Lives Matter, that said that black people were disproportionately being killed because of COVID, due to racism, not due to anything else. And rather than admit that, then they wrote their own cred report that said that somehow institutional racism didn't exist, and it was just a question of geography that black people seem to die in greater numbers than white during that. So all that, I suppose, gives you an idea. And I suppose what lessons do we kind of draw from that? Well, look, obviously, our understanding of institutional racism is that institutions do act in that way. It's ingrained in what they do. It's not a question of one or two bad apples. And that's why it keeps happening. And they can't explain it. And it will always happen while we have an institution there that's there to defend private property and wealth and seeks to divide, along with government policy around immigration, trying to divide working class people. So, the more, our asylum policy makes no sense, does it? We're short of 100,000 nurses, we're short of 160,000 care workers, yet supposedly we can't let 40,000 people seeking asylum come into this country. We can let them come if they're Ukrainian, but we can't obviously let them come if they're black or Asian or whatever. Yeah. So it makes no sense, even from capitalist terms, only if you think about the role that racism plays within them maintaining their class role. It only makes sense to understand that the state operates in that way because it can't operate in a different way and maintain its power. You know? And the only way that we're ever going to get rid of racism is by getting rid of the state itself and the institutions that support it, like the police. So there's the police for you. Can we trust Labour to do that? Clearly we can't. Keir Starmer won't even say that Rwanda policy is wrong. He may say it's costing too much money for the British taxpayer, but that's hardly saying that it's morally repugnant, that they want to send people that are fleeing wars that often we're involved in, or fleeing climate change that we've been responsible for as a Western powerhouse, and use industrialisation to build ourselves up, and use slavery to make this country as rich as it is now compared to other nations of the world. For us to say that we're not interested in doing any of those things. Clearly Labour want to, because they've got this idea that they can control the state, and then once they're in control they'll do what they want to do. Well, I heard a guy, I think it's from Tesla, the trade union, one of the rail unions, and he said, "Oh, well, we don't really trust Starmer, but we're gonna let him get in, and then once he's in, we're gonna ask him to do what we want him to do." And I was like, "That's not how it works." Yeah. If you think he's bad now, he's going to be 10 times worse if he wins. Don't get me wrong, I want to get rid of the Tories as quickly as possible. But if you believe that somehow Starmer's going to make things better for us, yeah, or he's going to side with people fighting racism rather than people defending racists, you only have to look at Sadiq Khan. Spent years defending the police forces to the Met, and now all of a sudden he's suddenly realised that they may be racist. Oh well, you know. So these people cannot be trusted because they again don't understand the role that the state and capitalism plays in maintaining racism. And therefore we have to be able to organise people on the ground. We have to be able to offer people, working class people, and put a class argument to them. That if you want to win your pay dispute, if you want to fight against injustice, if you want to fight against climate change, you have to be able to unite with people that live alongside you. You do not accept the myths and lies about racism, or that somehow we're better or different because of your sexuality or because of your gender. We have to argue that your interests lie with the interests of fighting for justice for black people or for trans people, that only if we actually want to truly transform this world, that we have to fight together for that unity to fight it. And yeah, that doesn't mean we don't organise against racism. We're out next Tuesday. If you can make it, please come along. Or I think they're out this Saturday in Altrincham as well. Please come out if you come to either of those two dates, and come out and leaflet against people like Britain First who are feeding off the racism of this Tory government. But let's understand that it's the government that are the ones that are creating this racist atmosphere, and you know, we have to be ready that even if we do get rid of the Tories, race is the card that will continue to play even under the Labour government, and it could see a resurgence to the far right even more, where people feel that the people that are supposed to be on their side are abandoning them. And so therefore, we need more of us to be involved as revolutionaries, as socialists that are willing to put the arguments about what sort of state that we need, but obviously work alongside others that are in the Labour Party, they're in trade unions, that want to fight racism in the here and now to create a better world for all of us. Thank you.